Hello everybody and welcome back to another new video on my channel. Today I'm very excited. I'm going to be going through all of my top tips for backpacking around Europe. I just got back from about a month-long backpacking trip and I learned a lot and I have a lot to share, so I'm going to be going through all of that in today's video. I will leave timestamps for everything that I'm going to be going over in the description below in case there's one aspect of the video that you are more interested in seeing. I'm going to start out by talking about Eurail because that was the pass that I used to get all around Europe, and it basically just allowed me to take the trains everywhere. So I'm going to go through all of the details with that, and then I'm going to be talking about Activies and how I book those and any top tips I have with regards to that. And then I'm just going to be talking about logistics, how things behind the scenes that I needed to do in order to make sure that the trip ran as smooth as possible, things like hostels, public transportation, cell phones, all of that kind of thing. Then I'm going to be talking about all of the necessary apps that you need to make sure that you have before you go on your backpacking trip. So let's just hop right in. I'm going to start by talking about Eurail. So Eurail, or interrail if you are in Europe, it is basically a train pass, and it means that a lot of the trains that you would normally have to pay for you get for free, or you have to pay a small fee for a seat reservation, which I will talk about a little bit more in a second. In my experience, Eurail is the absolute best way to go about getting around Europe. I wanted to take trains everywhere. I don't like flying. You definitely could do that if you want, but I just find that taking the trains places means that you get a different view of everything. You get to stay on the ground and see what's going on, and it's pretty relaxing. So the way that Eurail works is you purchase a specific amount of travel days within a specific amount of time. So for me, I got the 15 days of travel within 2 months. So that basically means I can go on as many trains as I want on each one of those travel days. And like I said, sometimes there is a seat reservation fee. So I found that more if you were on the east side of Europe, you didn't have to do the seat reservation as much, or for shorter regional trains, sometimes you didn't have to do the seat reservation. I had to get seat reservations for a lot of the things, like when I went to Barcelona to Paris or to Amsterdam, some of the ones to the ones that go between countries you have to do a lot more. And basically what a seat reservation is exactly what it sounds like. You just buy your seat on the train, because a lot of the trains do fill up really quickly, and so you want to do these seat reservations as far in advance as possible. If you are trying to do this trip a little bit more chilled, maybe you're not planning as much, I would say double check where those seat reservations are going to be needed, because they do sell out a little bit far in advance, I found. So the sooner that you book those, the cheaper that they'll be, and the more comfortable you'll be to know that you'll be able to get from one place to another. When it comes to booking your seat reservations, you can do that apparently in the station. I didn't try doing that. I just did all of my reservations online just because it was easier. I have heard that it's cheaper to do it in the station, but again, if you don't have a lot of time in a place and there aren't any seat reservations available, then you're going to be struggling a little bit. If you want to make sure that Eurail is right for you, I did do a price comparison before I bought the pass. I believe the pass that I bought was about $420, which I did the math and I worked out, I added on how much I would expect to pay for each of my seat reservations, because I already knew the route that I was taking. So once I had done that, I compared it how much I would pay if I bought each individual train ticket, and for me, I saved about half the money. It was literally about half the cost. So this is a great use of your money. Additionally, I think it's also important to note that it is a lot more flexible, especially if you are in more of those Eastern countries where you don't have to pay for as much. Like in Germany, you don't have to do the seat reservations. In Austria, Slovenia, all of those places, I didn't have to do seat reservations. And it just made the whole travel experience a lot more flexible in general. For example, whenever I was in Slovenia, I had a couple of travel days left over that I wasn't going to use. So I could use my travel days to get from Ljubljana to Lake Bled on their regional trains without having to pay anything. Whereas if I hadn't done that, I would have had to have either paid for the regional train or paid for a bus or something like that. Additionally, it's not just trains that are included in this pass. I do believe that they have like some ferries. I didn't use the pass for that, but I think I have some friends who did, so you can also look into that. A tip, if you do have this pass, especially depending on the number of days that you have, you can also use the regional trains sometimes to get through some of the bigger cities. So whenever I was in Vienna, I just took the regional trains from various stations instead of having to pay for the subway. A lot of the cities have a few big train stations, so you can often get the trains between those bigger train stations. So it's just something to look into if you want to save a few euros. Something to keep in mind as well is that you are probably going to be needing to do some switching of trains, and these trains are not always the most reliable whenever it comes to time. They are often delayed, so if you are making a switch, just make sure that you have enough time to make that switch. I would say anything under about a 30-minute switch I would get quite nervous about, and that's fine. You can still take the risk and give it a go. I would just say maybe try to plan your travel days so that if you do miss that train, there's another train that you can take later on that day if possible. That is where I think that the flexibility of the pass really comes in handy, because it makes that a lot easier to do if you need to switch your train around. My other tip when it comes to taking the trains and planning out your trip is if you are solo traveling. I did do some solo traveling during my trip. If you are solo traveling, try to make sure that you are picking trains at reasonable hours of the day. I had a few early morning trains and a few evening trains, but I always tried to make sure that I was leaving and arriving like in the middle of the day, give or take, times whenever there would be people out and about, especially like walking to the station. Sometimes those stations are a little bit of a hot spot for a little bit more danger and just homeless people and things like that, which is totally fine, but you as a solo traveler may just want to be aware of other people who are around, and I like it when there's more people around, so I always tried to make sure that I was picking trains in reasonable hours, usually between like 8 and like 7 or 8 in the evening, because you do remember the sun sets actually quite late over there compared to where I live in the US anyway. Like it sets here probably like 7, 8-ish. Over there it was like after 9, maybe even like 10-ish. So that's something to keep in mind. Next I'm going to be talking about activities and all of the tips that I have when it comes to those. First things first, again, I know that flexibility is really fun and doing it on the fly can be really fun. If there's some specific places that you are going to that you really want to do something at, you may want to look them up in advance, because a lot of places you have to book tickets quite far in advance, especially in the busy season. So if you're going in like the summertime, things like the Anne Frank house, that you have to book like 6 weeks in advance. So I didn't get to go to that because I didn't know that. And I tried to book it like 3 weeks in advance thinking I was being really proactive, and then it had already sold out. I did have to book the Van Gogh Museum pretty far in advance. I got really lucky with Sagrada Familia, and I just nabbed some tickets for literally like the last time slot of the day when I booked him like 2 days in advance. But because I was there in May, that's probably why, but you might want to look into that place if you're going there, doing that a little bit further in advance. Park Güell as well. I had to book those. I couldn't get tickets for those unless we did a guided walking tour, so that was another option. If it is sold out, then maybe you will be willing to spend a little bit more to do a guided tour, which might be able to get you into a lot of places. We also had to book the Duomo de Milan in advance as well. So these are all things that you just want to look at where you're going, and if you really want to go somewhere, then maybe try to do some planning around that place and book those tickets far in advance. I primarily use the app Get Your Guide as well for finding activities. They have a whole bunch of tours in places that you can do, and I had really good experiences with all of the ones that I booked through them. Additionally, I just like looking through like that kind of thing, like Get Your Guide, looking through Expedia, anything that does guided tours, just to see what the highlights of those tours are, because sometimes you can just go walk to them yourself and you don't really need a tour guide, or you can get tickets there and you can go in, just to kind of brainstorm what people like to do in the area and what cool things there are. Additionally, I would highly, highly, highly recommend, if you don't do anything else, please look up free walking tours in the city that you're going to, because these things are so, so good. We did like 4 or 5 probably my whole trip, and every single one of them was really, really good. We learned a lot. You get to be with a tour guide who is usually local to the area, and you can pay them as much as you want. It is technically free, but they work off of tips, so you should expect to have to pay them, but you don't have to pay them near as much as you would pay for, say, a guided walking tour through like Get Your Guide or Travelocity or like something like that. You get to pay however much you feel like the tour was worth. I will say I had some really, really good tours and a couple of tours that weren't quite as good, so we didn't pay them as much, but that's the beauty of those tours, is it's your choice however much you think that the tour is worth. And it's usually going to be a lot cheaper and they don't expect as much. So those things are great. Your hostel might do some tours. We honestly just looked up free walking tours Amsterdam or free walking tours Vienna, whatever it was, and we found some online usually. And like I said, they were really good. Also, those tours are cool because you might meet some new people and find some new friends who you can spend some more time with as well if you're solo traveling. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to logistics, like all of those little things that you need to remember before you go, while you're there, all of it. So starting out with hostels, my experience in the hostels were honestly pretty much all really, really good. My one issue that I had was when I booked a couple of hostels that were quite a bit outside of the city limits, or not like outside of the city limits, but outside of like the main tourist stuff. My favorite hostels by far were the ones that I could just walk out of and then walk around. They often were a little bit more pricey, but not always. Some of them really weren't. Like my hostel in Madrid was the cheapest one that I think we went to the whole time. And it was absolutely amazing. It was called The Hat, by the way. And it was right next to Plaza Mayor, and we walked everywhere. We did not use public transportation at all. The 2 hostels that I really was not that big of a fan of were in Barcelona and in Berlin. And in both of these cities, I got hostel that was a little bit further outside of the limits, and I had to like take public transport to be able to get to the touristy stuff. And that's fine, that is what it is. I think the hostels themselves weren't my favorite in general, but just location is absolutely key. Really try to make sure that you're picking somewhere where you feel safe. Those 2 hostels, I definitely didn't feel as safe as I did in some of the other ones. So I think that above everything else, location is key. Also, in some of the hostels, I stayed in solo rooms whenever I was alone, and I really wish I hadn't have done that. I think that staying in a room with other people feels more safe because you are not just like an anonymous person. So especially like solo traveling, if you don't come back and your stuff is all there and whatever, people might start to get a bit concerned. At least that's what I would think and hope. Also, being in those rooms is such a good way to make friends. People are usually pretty friendly. I stayed in only female dorms whenever I did do the dorms, and I liked that so much more. And I felt so safe. It was great. I made some friends. I talked to people, got ideas for other things to do. I booked pretty much all of my hostels through Hostelworld. It's just a really easy way to find good places to stay. But a lot of the hostels when I got there, they recommended that in the future to book via their website. So maybe you find a good hostel in Hostelworld and then you actually book it through their website because they're actually cheaper. Hostelworld has some extra fees involved. The cool thing as well about Hostelworld is if you do book your hostel through them, and even if you don't actually, but they have some group chats that you can talk in for the hostel that you're staying in, also just for the city as well. So you can reach out to people and kind of connect with people that way if that's something you're interested in. Like I said, most of the hostels that I stayed in were really, really fun. I'll go through a couple of my favorite ones that I stayed in. First of all, the Hat Madrid. That one was so cool. Great location. It had a rooftop bar with good food, honestly, and drinks. So I'd highly recommend that one. I also stayed in, it was called like the Fuzzy Log, I think. It was in Ljubljana, and this was another really, really cool one. I just love the theming of this place. It also had a rooftop bar. And yeah, I stayed in the solo room on there, and I really liked that because it was like a bunk, and then you could change the lights however you wanted, so that was really cool. So in Amsterdam, I stayed in the Stay OK Amsterdam Vondelpark, and that was good. It was a little bit further outside of the city as well, but it had its own little area around it, so it had like good restaurants and stuff, and it wasn't that bad of a trip in, and we just took trams and stuff there. But that one was a really, really good one. We also stayed in the Meininger Zurich Green City. This one was also a little bit outside of the limits, so that wasn't my favorite thing about it, but this one was really just like a hotel that they turned into a dorm. So it was actually really, really, really nice, and it like basically felt like you were staying at a hotel for a very small price, so that was nice. I stayed in the Snuffle Hostel in Bruges, and this was also a really nice one. It had a bar. I stayed in my own room in this one, so I can't say much about like the atmosphere of the people who were staying there, but it was really good location, really easy to walk to. I walked there from the station. Bruges was great in general. It was very safe. Another hostel that I stayed in was in Vienna. It was called the Joe and Joe Vienna. It was literally like on top of an IKEA. Like I walked through IKEA, because why not? And I really liked this one as well. I did actually have my own room here too, but they had a good kitchen. And I just like the way that they decorated the place was really, really cool. When you are in the hostels, please just be respectful. Most people there are really, really nice. I don't really feel like I had any issues anywhere. It's tough because people are going to be getting up at weird hours or going to bed at weird hours. I felt so bad there in Zurich. I got back at probably like midnight, and then I left at like 5 in the morning. And so in both those times, nobody was really awake, and I was waking them up, and I felt so bad, but it just is what it is. People are traveling. It happened to me in some places where I was the one sleeping, people were getting up, moving around, so just try your best to be quiet, try not to turn any big lights on. Yeah, just be respectful. So in every city that we were in, we took the public transport everywhere. Some places were a lot easier to figure out than others. I would just say with that, try talking to a local. They can be really, really helpful. Try talking to the desk, the help desk, to just show them where you're trying to go, and they'll just like help you get a ticket that's best for you. You may need to validate your tickets in some places. I think Germany, we had to validate our tickets. Italy, you definitely had to validate tickets. Paris, I think you might have needed to as well. All of those places, just make sure that you are, if it is a requirement, because you will get fined if you don't. And also just make sure you have the correct ticket. This is why it's important to maybe talk to a local and just double, triple check that you have the correct ticket. My friends had an incorrect ticket in Paris, and they got fined 50 euros each. And you don't want to be losing 50 euros if you don't have to lose 50 euros, because it's the difference between maybe 3 euros and a conversation with a local versus 50 euros. So a lot of them at the ticket stands too, you can put it into English so you know what you're at least reading. So good luck. Make sure that you have a plan for your phone. Obviously, if you go over there, you might not have a travel plan. If you do have a travel plan, make sure you know what it is and what you're getting yourself into. I just used my international plan. I think I paid like $10 a day to have my plan that I have at home, which is like unlimited data, which is what I wanted and what worked the best for me. My friends bought a like hotspot, Wi-Fi hotspot that they could carry around with them that they shared. And it had like 20 gigabytes of data on there, so they would just turn it on whenever it was essential. A lot of places did have Wi-Fi. It wasn't always the best Wi-Fi, but a lot of public places had it. You do need it to get your Eurail pass to work, so that is another thing to think about whenever you're doing that. And just, I know that there are also some apps that you can get that give you like an eSIM card, so maybe that would work best for you. So just do your research into that. Like I said, I just used my international plan, and it was what made the most sense for me. Just a couple other logistical things. I would recommend getting euros when you're in the US at a currency exchange, maybe before you fly. I just got cash there. I got like 200 euros, and that was enough for me for the trip. I would use my credit card in a lot of places, but you do get charged fees. I think I have like $80 or something in just fees, which is really, really annoying. And I kind of wish I would have used more cash places, but it is what it is. That is something I've learned. try to use cash if you can, so you can avoid those fees. Get the cash before you leave, so you pay the fee once and then you're good to go. I also did get travel insurance for this trip. I don't often do that unless it's like a big trip like this, so I used World Nomads. It was super, super easy. I literally just put in where I was gonna go and it did the insurance for me. It's through Nationwide, I believe, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. But luckily I didn't need to use it, so I can't really say much about how it is help-wise if you are in a situation that you need it. But I have heard good things about them, and yeah, it was pretty cheap. It wasn't too bad. It's like $150 for me, so. Travel insurance is just useful if something happens and you need to come back early or anything like that. They'll cover your expenses for you. So I would definitely recommend, if you are going on a big trip like that, to invest in some travel insurance just in case. So now I'm going to go through the apps that you absolutely need to have if you are going to Europe. First of all is Google Maps and Apple Maps and Google Translate. So I use both Google Maps and Apple Maps. I usually prefer Apple Maps. I don't think that there was that big of a difference between Apple and Google. Sometimes I would like double check one or the other just to make sure that I was going in good ways. My Apple Maps sometimes like would turn off the bus like option for like half the trip, but I realized like that was something on my end. Like I must have hit no buses at some point and then never turned that off. So that was really the only difference for me between the two apps I found. Google was sometimes a bit more helpful because it gave you the step-by-step instructions a little bit differently, so it's really up to you. I would say have both just so you can like double check yourself and make sure that you are getting from place A to place B in the most efficient way possible. If you do have Eurail, you're going to need the Eurail app, which is called like Rail Planner. It's kind of an annoying app. You just put in your train journeys, make sure that you turn on your travel days, and then add your journeys to your ticket, because that is what they check when you're on the train to make sure that you are in fact supposed to be on that train. So a lot of the ticket people want to see the specific journey on that ticket. So even though technically you can like add and take away and whatever, especially in the free places, you still want to make sure that you add the correct journeys into it that you are taking, so that the ticket person knows that you are supposed to be on that train and you have paid for that train. I also recommend having Hostel World on there, just in case somewhere, maybe you get stuck somewhere, something happens. We accidentally needed to book a place in Brussels, literally just for a night. We did it all through Hostel World, and it made it a lot easier to just have that readily available. Like I said, Google Translate is a lifesaver. It has like a picture feature, so you can take a picture of something and then it'll translate all of the words, which is really helpful whenever I was in like a grocery store and just trying to buy food there, because it would just tell me exactly what it was. So I would definitely recommend that. I also didn't bring any books on this trip, which is very, very, very sad. But I did bring my iPad, and so I just downloaded books onto like the Kindle app or like iBooks, so I could read books while I was away. Okay, so those are all of the apps you need. So now we're going to move on. And I'm just going to say one last little tip overall is just be open to new experiences, make new friends, talk to people. Don't be afraid to ask for people's Instagrams and then like DM them if you are going to be in similar places. I talked to a few people in some of the hostels where we were going to be in similar places, and then I was too scared to DM them and they didn't DM me, and that's fine, but I feel bad because I wish I would have, because later in the trip I got a little bit more keen on doing that. We actually met a few girls who, they were taking the same trains as us from Munich to Zurich, and then they were actually going to Milan the next day as well, which we also were doing on the same trains. So we like messaged them and we explored Zurich with them, we explored Milan with them, and it was really, really, really fun. They were so nice, and it was just so nice to meet new people. I did a similar thing whenever I got to Ljubljana. I took the train with a girl who was going on the same route as me, and then when I got there we were staying at different hostels, but we just like DM'd on Instagram and met up, and so it was nice to have somebody there to experience Ljubljana with. So that is all of my tips from going backpacking. If you've been backpacking and you have any other tips, then please leave them down below, or if you have any questions, let me know and I'll try my best to answer them, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!